All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Classic Comics and another Trek Talk live stream where I take a look at one of the episodes of the original Star Trek series, both the episode and the behind the scenes making of the episode. So we have finally arrived. This is, I guess, the most notorious episode in the third season. We're taking a look at Spock's brain, which is well, I don't think many people would put this as one of their favorites. Although some do like it. I know some who do. Okay, and as always, I'll be looking at Mark Cushman's book. These are the voyages for behind the scenes information. And again, a reminder, this is in production order. So this is episode 61 of the series. Okay, so we got some folks here. Hail, Lord Thoth. Good to see you, sir. Thank you for being here. And hail, Rogues 1138. Good to see you. And hello to Guagnar. Thank you for being here, sir. Okay, so yeah, Spock's brain. And, it'd been a long time since I watched this. And yeah, it's pretty much what I remembered. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into this here. So this is from an NBC press release issued on August 16th, 1968. A beautiful woman's ghostly image startles the officers and crew on the bridge of the Enterprise, but its disappearance brings the discovery that Spock's brain has been removed with surgical perfection in the premiere episode of Star Trek on Friday, September 20th. The adventure drama Spock's Brain stars William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, DeForest Kelly, blah, blah, blah. The Enterprise crew on its interplanetary mission to establish diplomatic relations with other life forms is shocked to learn that Spock's brain has been transplanted to a metal box and is being utilized to run the computer apparatus of a complex subterranean civilization several thousand years old. The theme of this episode is use it or lose it. Spock has a sharp mind through discipline and mental stimulation, while the thieves, dependent on machines for centuries to do their thinking for them, has lost much of their intellect. So they nearly pulled it off during the first half of the episode, at least. Spock's brain has a split personality. The teaser and Act 1 are fairly good. We get an alien ship to marvel over, a space babe in way out go go boots, and the shocking news that Spock's brain has been removed from his head. The writing during the first portion of the episode is crisp, and the acting tense as horror and mystery combine to set off an effective ticking clock. Back on the bridge, as Kirk obsesses over recovering what has been stolen, director Mark Daniels gets inventive. He angles the camera toward the view screen and lets Shatner pace back and forth before a background of moving stars, which was no easy trick for a TV production during the year of this production. And then comes a further promise for a novel adventure. They will be visiting a glacial planet where prehistoric men live. At this point, you can almost see why NBC was pleased to have this episode kicking off the third season. Act 2 is less successful, but not yet terrible. With the planetfall of Sigma Draconis 6 or 7, depending on who's talking, Daniels does an inspired job of getting camera coverage on the primates creeping around the frozen terrain. The battle sequence as the primitive men toss clubs and rocks at Kirk's landing party and toward the camera is well staged. Other nice touches include Kirk instructing his men to set the temperature on their uniforms to 72 degrees. The only time in the series we are told that the clothing can be used in this manner. And that was something I'd completely forgotten or never noticed before, that he basically tells them to do that. So apparently they can adjust the temperature in their uniforms. A subtle but touching moment as Kirk mistakenly says Spock's name while asking Scotty for a technical report. A fast falling elevator disguised as a cave, and some Gene Coon isms like in the elevator having McCoy say, call Chekhov and tell him to send my stomach down. The only blemish here, and it's a big one, is that the prehistoric men speak English. And with these Neanderthals, the dumbing down of the episode really begins. I don't know. It was kind of dumb before that, I think. Act 3 deteriorates further, plummeting almost as fast as that elevator. From this point on, snickering is encouraged. All the women who live underground speak English too, or at least a kind of childish, simplistic English, and they are all young hotties. Well, what's wrong with that? I mean, where are the elderly, the children, the ugly? We only see calendar girls with their obedient Neanderthal boy toys. If, as we are told, these women continue their line by breeding with the hulking men they capture, why do the females and males have so little in common, either physically or mentally? Wouldn't their offspring eventually take on traits of both? And that's a good point. That was something I hadn't really thought about when I watched the episode. Next up are the pain belts. Kuhn was recycling this idea from the Gamesters of Triskelion with its collars of obedience, which, even though he was not acknowledged with a screen credit, Kuhn had been significantly involved in that episode. Kirk had also been inflicted with pain in Charlie X and Return to Tomorrow, with Shatner amping it up a bit each time. Now, with sitcom veteran Daniels directing, Shatner's theatrics become almost laughable. Yeah, this is one of the episodes where Shatner kind of going over the top really does start to become very noticeable. We're still that little remote control device, the one that tells Spock's body to turn to the left and to the right, then walk forward or stand in place. Then suddenly it becomes a wizard machine where the twisting of one little dial has the brainless body of Spock moving forward to corner the female alien, confine her, then reach out and press a button on her wristband, nullifying the pain belts. And then Act 4 goes completely brain dead. The entire affair takes place in one room, making for very stagnant storytelling. I think that's just the reduced budgets on the show's telling there. With a story that sputters and stalls, as we are asked to believe that McCoy, having had a brain tune up, can reinstall Spock's gray matter without mussing a single hair on the Vulcan's head. Justifiable or not, this inductee into the Star Trek Hall of Shame tops nearly every list ever compiled by fans and critics alike as the original series' absolute worst. Okay. Rogue says, gorgeous Barbarella type women control this planet. Yeah. And Spock looks like Lobot from Empire. Yeah, I've noticed that or had that thought too. You know, that thing on his head. I wonder if they were inspired by this episode. Wouldn't surprise me. It's pretty clear that Lucas did borrow stuff from Star Trek on more than one occasion. Like in the Corbomite maneuver with the giant spherical, vessel kind of reminds you of the Death Star. And it even traps the Enterprise in a tractor beam, you know. Okay. So let's get into this one. So the Enterprise encounters an alien vessel of an unknown type, and their attempts to contact it go unanswered. And there's a good shot of it right there. And then a woman appears on the bridge, and she pushes a button on her wristband to render them unconscious. Let me take a drink of water right quick. Okay. And Rogue says Spock's head unshaven during surgeries. Yeah, I mean that it's unshaven, but there's no sign of surgery, no scarring or anything. Kind of reminds me of there's one of I forget which one it was, but there's one of the John Carter novels. I think it's like maybe the fifth or sixth one, where a character, I guess that maybe adhesive tape was like a brand new thing at the time, because there's a scene where a guy like does brain surgery on somebody, and then when he closes the head wound up, he literally just tapes the head up, with tape. He closes it with tape. Okay. Yeah, so she zaps them all with her little wristband and renders everyone on the bridge unconscious. And by the way, they never say her name in the episode, but this character's name is Kara. That's her name. See there, she presses the button, and then everyone else on the ship, it's not just the bridge, but everyone, even in sickbay, is passing out. And then after everyone's out, she lovingly strokes Spock's head, his actual head, not something else. Okay. And this episode was written by Lee Cronin, but is covered in previous streams. Lee Cronin was a pseudonym for Gene Coon. He had written some other episodes under that name. All right, now, and this is directed by Mark Daniels, and of course he's been one of their more frequent directors over the course of the series. So they wake up, and Kirk notices that Spock is missing. Then he gets a call from McCoy, who's frantically telling Kirk he needs to get to sickbay right away. So he comes to sickbay to find that Spock is in sickbay, and he is, of course, dismayed. He's hooked up to all this life support equipment, and Kirk's asking, what's wrong with him, and of course, then he gets the news: his brain is gone. And of course, a fun drinking game would be to watch this episode and just take a drink every time someone says brain. I think you'd get hammered pretty quick. So, yes, Spock's brain has been surgically removed, and quite skillfully, McCoy adds, saying that due to the work of whoever did it, and also in part due to Spock's Vulcan physiology, his body is still alive. Now, McCoy says that he can keep Spock alive for another 48 hours or so, but after that, it's going to be too late. Kirk realizes that the mysterious woman who appeared on the bridge must be responsible, and he is determined to find her and return Spock's brain. So on the bridge, and again, here's that shot I mentioned. There's several shots like this from the back of the bridge towards the screen. And I don't think this is the first time they've ever done that, but it is, I think, the first time they've done it when the kind of star field effect is actually up on the screen, where the stars are moving. I think there's maybe been one or two where they had some other image up there, like a diagram or something, and then maybe some, but where it's a star field, but it's obviously just like a poster or something, the stars aren't actually moving. Okay, so they're able to detect the ship's ion trail. And this is something they mentioned several times. Like they mentioned that ship has an ion engine. And Scotty talks about how, they must be so much more advanced than us to use ion engines. And I had kind of thought that the impulse engines were ion engines, but I guess I was wrong. But they detect the ion trail, and so they decide to follow it, and they track it back to a star system. Uh, and they find that this system's called Sigma Draconis. Again, 6 or 7, depending on who's talking about it. The system has 3 Class M planets that the women could have originated from, but 2 of them aren't technologically advanced enough to produce the ship they encountered, and the other one is in an ice age and has no evidence of civilization at all. Then Uhura says she's detecting some energy readings of some kind from the glacial planet in the ice age. Now, at this point, they only have about 8 hours before Spock's body is going to die, so they discuss, uh, which planet are they going to go to. And ultimately, Kirk decides that they're going to try the planet that's in the ice age, the glacial planet. So they beam down to the planet, and then Scotty scans for, with his I'm sorry, no, Chekhov scans with his tricorder initially, and he detects nothing unusual. But then after a few minutes, Scotty detects some unusual energy. Detects 5 humanoid life forms nearby. So they move to find them, and they encounter a group of tribesmen, cavemen basically, who attack them with rocks and clubs. And these tribesmen all have like Prince Valiant, like page boy haircuts for some reason. So they attack the Enterprise crew, throwing rocks and sticks. And one of them charges at them, and Kirk stuns him. And when that happens, the other turn tail and flee. Then they question the stunned tribesmen, and they tell him, we're not here to hurt you. We just want some information. And then the tribesman asks if they are the others. And when Kirk asks who the others are, he says that they are the givers of pain and delight. Now, when Kirk asks where the others come from, the caveman says they come for everyone eventually. And Kirk asks if they ever come for their women. But the man doesn't really understand that word, woman. He doesn't really understand what it means. He also doesn't understand several other words, such as mate or companion. So Kirk asks him to take them to the others, but the man refuses. Now, then Chekhov says that he's detecting a large underground structure nearby, and they decide to go and check that out, but then the man flees before they can stop him. Now, they find a cave, and the cave contains like food and weapons and some other supplies, but they notice that there's some kind of security system in place. It's like, the kind of laser eye system. There's these lights on the walls, and they realize if they pass through this light beam, it's probably going to trigger some kind of security system. So at this point, Kirk orders McCoy to beam down. So he beams down with Spock. And it's here that for the first time, we see Spock in his little remote control helmet. And he's being remote control guided by McCoy, who's got this little hand terminal here. So they enter the cave, and then Kirk breaks the beam of light, which triggers the security system. So a door slams down on the cave, shutting them in. And then the whole thing is an elevator, which rapidly drops down underground. Now, eventually it stops. And when the door opens, they see a woman who is startled to see them. And she starts to touch her little stun device on her wrist. But Kirk beats her to it and stuns her first. Now, McCoy awakens her, and then Kirk demands to know where Spock's brain is. But she says she knows nothing about that. And Kirk demands answers, but her answers are very childish and kind of simplistic. Her speech is kind of sounding like a little child, and so McCoy says her intellectual development seems to be more at the level of around like a 5 or 6 year old, and also that her physiological readings indicate that she is telling the truth. She really doesn't know. Then Scotty says that he's picking up some sort of signal on his communicator. They think it might be Spock, so Kirk uses his communicator, and it turns out it is Spock, and he's able to speak with Spock, who initially expresses pleasure at hearing them again. Kirk asks where he is, but Spock says he doesn't know, and so they begin looking for him. Then they encounter the same woman who had appeared on the ship, and again Kirk tries to stun her, but she beats him to it and uses her wrist device to render the landing party all unconscious. Although, interestingly, while it stuns all of them, it doesn't affect Spock or her, which I can understand. Spock, maybe like his brain isn't working, so, maybe his nervous system isn't working right. I don't know, but why isn't it stunning her? You would think it would. Okay. So they eventually wake up, and Kirk demands to know where Spock's brain is. And again, they claim not to know who Spock is or what the word brain means either, kind of like the men up on the surface. They're like, I don't even know what that is. And Kirk insists that this woman did appear on their ship and took Spock's brain. But again, keeps insisting, like, I don't know what you're talking about. I know nothing about this. Kirk demands to know who's in charge. And the woman, again, Kara is her name, she says that she's in charge. And McCoy observes that she couldn't have performed the surgery to remove Spock's brain herself. And then Kirk asks who controls this whole complex that they live in. And then she mentions a controller. And Kirk demands to see the controller, but she says that the controller is, that is planet forbidden. You cannot see the controller. And McCoy again insists they're just trying to find Spock's brain. And she angrily then, of course, we get the classic line, brain and brain. What is brain? Then she asks, is the brain a controller? And they realize that Spock's brain has been taken and is being used to control this entire underground complex that these people live in. Kirk implores her to take them to the controller. Hold on, let me. There we go. He's down on his knees begging, imploring her to take them to the controller. But instead, she zaps them, which activates these pain belts that they have. And I can kind of see Shatner here. Yeah, there are several scenes here where Shatner's clearly, he's we're starting to see the kind of notorious Shatner overacting. And I mean, we've seen touches before, but here in the third season, it's really starting to become more prevalent. Renders them unconscious. Now, eventually they wake up and the women are gone. And the women have these, kind of big guys that they use as guards and as bodyguards. And presumably these are some of the cavemen from up on the surface. And so presumably, these women are the givers of pain and delights. The pain is pretty clear where that comes from. The delights, I think we can we can use our imagination on that. Although it's strange again that they don't, or well, at least the ones on the surface don't know what a woman is, or at least don't know the word. Okay, so they try to leave the room, but the guards will not allow them to leave. And then they notice that there are tricorders and communicators and phasers, and also, or not the phasers, no, not the phasers, but also the remote control device are all on a table nearby. Kirk tries to get to them, but again, the guard stops him. And after discussing the matter, he tries again, and then a brawl ensues. And eventually, Kirk and the others overpower the guards. Then, using his communicator, contacts Spock again. Spock asks why they've come for him, and Kirk says that they want to return his brain to his body. And Spock says, I appreciate that, but it's unlikely that's going to work. There is currently no known way to restore a brain that's been removed, no way to reimplant a brain. He also observes, of course, that his body can only survive 24 hours without the brain, and Kirk says they have about 5 hours left to restore it. He tells Spock to keep transmitting a signal so that they can track it and find him. And Kirk also asks if Spock can help them remove the pain-giving devices they wear. And Spock says that they can be removed by pressing a red button on the women's wrist devices. So then they track the signal to another chamber, but when they enter, the woman Carr is there inside and she zaps them with the pain belts again. But before they fall unconscious, Kirk is able to grab the remote control and then pilot Spock's body to grab the woman and then press the red button on her wrist device, removing the pain devices. At this point, the woman says they cannot take the controller as the old one, the one they used to have is finished, died, I guess. And they need this brain and this controller, and he will bring life to her people for the next 10,000 years. Now, Kirk insists that she returns Spock's brain and asks how she did it. And she says she doesn't know, telling Kirk that she used the old knowledge, which was imparted by the teacher. The teacher is a helmet. And, it's basically this thing that implants knowledge and information into your brain. And Spock tells them that the helmet has some sort of connection to the woman. So they force her to wear the helmet, and it boosts her intelligence. And she's able to understand what's going on, and she begins speaking differently. And she says that, she remembers taking the brain now, and she knows how to remove the brain. But she also says she also knows how to use their weapons now and pulls a phaser, which is set to kill on Kirk. And she warns that she is willing to kill them if necessary. And she says that, well, she's already killing Spock. And she argues that Spock will live for another 10,000 years because, they're another one of these societies where they've got a machine that provides everything for them. And, when they're dependent upon the machine, kind of like the Apple or like, kind of like Landru, maybe as well, Return of the Archons, that kind of thing. And this is an interesting part. So again, Kirk argues for her to return the brain, and so she makes the argument that the need of her people for the brain outweighs their need to have Spock restored. So basically, she's arguing the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, and therefore I'm not going to return this brain. Which I think's an interesting little twist. She kind of takes that phrase and turns it on them, saying, "Yeah, wait, we need the brain more than you do, and there's way more of us than you, so therefore, yeah, we're keeping this brain." And then, and then Scotty pretends to faint, and that distracts her long enough for Kirk to disarm her and take the phaser. Not the most, not the most manly moment for Scotty. He literally just kind of like goes like, "Oh," and falls over. Okay, so now Kirk asks her how long that the knowledge she has will last, and she says it'll last about 3 hours, which McCoy says is just enough time to perform the operation. But she refuses to do so. Then McCoy suggests that he wear the teaching helmet and receive the knowledge to perform the operation. But Spock warns that the helmet is designed to work on these aliens, not on a human brain. And trying may kill him or, render him maybe a vegetable or something. But McCoy argues that as a surgeon, he may be able to retain the knowledge. He also argues that if he could then share that information with others back in the Federation, this knowledge could save untold lives, and says that he thinks that it's worth the risk of trying. And Kirk, because he doesn't have a whole lot of choice here, he reluctantly agrees. So McCoy puts the helmet on, and his brain gets zapped, and it works, giving McCoy the knowledge to restore Spock's brain. And McCoy's like, of course, the leg bone connects to the ankle bone. How could I have not realized that before? So then he begins the procedure. But eventually, the knowledge begins to fade, and he struggles to complete the operation. Uh, let's see. So at this point, Kirk tells McCoy to give priority to restoring Spock's vocal centers, restoring his speech. And eventually, he is able to do it, and Spock begins talking. And then Spock talks him through restoring his motor functions. Eventually, they go through a thing where he can move his finger, then his hand, then his arm, et cetera, et cetera. So you see, restoring a brain into a central nervous system is really quite easy. You know, it's kind of like that episode of oh, I forget which one, but there was an episode of Discovery where what's her face, the engineer, what's her name, Jet Reno, isn't that her name? So there's a character again. There's a character who's like had like brain damage or needs brain surgery, and then the engineer performs it, and she just sort of shrugs it off as, yeah, it's just, you know, humans are just another machine. It's really no different. Okay, sure. And then a couple of episodes later, she goes to the doctor and is like, "Hey, I have a hangnail. Can you fix this?" Yeah, brilliant show. And Rogue says, "A child could, yeah, a caveman could do it. A caveman. They could get one of those cavemen. I mean, if he got zapped with the helmet, he could do it." Okay, so eventually Spock is restored. Now, the woman complains that they're all going to die. Their people will die out without the controller to take care of them. And then Spock gives her a little speech, basically kind of like he did in the Apple, where he basically kind of encourages them, basically tells them you're going to be better off on your own without this machine telling you what to do and providing everything for you, and this is part of why they kind of talk in this sort of simplistic way, because they just, they've kind of regressed mentally to be almost like childlike. It's funny because, or maybe not funny, how their dependence on AI basically, not in the strictest sense, but in effect on a computer system to provide everything has enfeebled them. It's enfeebled them and made them more helpless. And I think that's very relevant now, with what's happening with the AI in our own culture. Because I mean, you look at people who are struggling to, and depending upon AI to do their homework and all this stuff. And I'm afraid it's going to lead us into a society that's going to be like this, where a lot of people really can't really do anything on their own without the AI to tell them what to frickin' do. And Rogue says we're moving toward this with AI and possibly Skynet. Yeah, well, yeah, there's that too. But anyway, so he tells the woman that, that basically he recommends that the women who live down below and the men up above, they need to, they need to live together, and that the Federation will help them sort of, kind of like with the Apple, the Federation will kind of send specialists who will help them kind of get their civilization going again. Okay, and then Spock begins to relate how an ice age long ago caused an ancient civilization to create the underground facility for the women to take shelter while the men stayed up on the surface. Uh, and eventually, this led to a division between a schism between the male and female portions of the population. And they eventually kind of became adversarial. And then, of course, McCoy laments that he shouldn't have restored Spock's speech centers. And they all have a laugh, and it ends there. Okay. And so for a grade, I mean, C minus, I guess. You know, definitely a C of some kind. I'll go with a C minus. All right, let me take a drink of water again here, right quick. All right. Okay, so Spock's brain has a split personality. The teaser and Act One are fairly good. We get an alien ship to marvel over, which wasn't bad for 1968. Oh, hold on, let me remove that. I keep doing that and hitting that thing. Okay. There we go. Okay, so part of the reason that they did this episode was because it was right around this time that the first heart transplant took place, and or at least the first successful one, which was, and it was actually in South Africa. Which was a bit of a surprise to me. You wouldn't think it would be South Africa. You'd think it would be somewhere else, but apparently it was. And that's kind of what inspired this episode about basically organs being removed. Okay, the writing during the first portion of this episode is crisp and the acting tense. Oh, I'm sorry, I already read that. Let me skip ahead. Spock's brain was filled with seemingly good ideas, or at least well intended ones. In June of 1968, Gene Roddenberry uh, said that NBC had encouraged him to continue to intensify speculation on any exciting aspects of law, religion, uh, or science, to comment on the insanity of war, on bacteriological and other horror weapons, and on the promises and problems of human organ transplants. Organ swapping was a hot topic that year. The first heart transplant was as recent as December 3rd, 1967, in South Africa. The patient lived for 18 days before dying amidst controversy and a media circus. More transplants were attempted throughout 1968 to the outrage of some religious groups. When former Star Trek producer Gene Coon met with Gene Roddenberry in March 1968 to discuss 6 story assignments he had promised to take on as part of his exit strategy from Star Trek, they felt it would be interesting, pertinent, and promotable to do a story about organ transplants. And only a brain could be more controversial or compelling than a heart. Leonard Nimoy later commented, I think it was an interesting idea. If you did an episode called Einstein's Brain, you know that what you were dealing with. And that was the attempt to do something with a brain that was special. Spock had brain power that was unusual, unique, useful, valuable, and somebody would want to steal it. Starting from that premise, if I were the producer of the series and a writer came in and said, we have an idea to do a story about Spock's brain and someone wants to steal it, I'd pay attention, I think. The idea of using a human brain to serve as a sort of computer was not entirely new. Kuhn, who was known for borrowing an idea now and then, and you can see Arena. I Trek Talk on Arena for that because he basically the basic plot of Arena was from a short story. I forget the name of it, and actually he had actually used the conceit of a brain being used as a computer bank before when he worked on Wild Wild West. Where the brains of several famous scientists are stolen and used to form the world's first computer. And the idea wasn't even new then. Kuhn and his Wild Wild West story editor, Henry Sharp, had lifted the idea from Raymond F. Jones, whose short story, The Cybernetic Brains, was published in Startling Stories back in 1950. As with The Last Gunfight, which was the title of Spectre of the Gun at this point, Kuhn would continue to masquerade as Lee Cronin in an effort to provide or to avoid problems with his day job employers, Universal TV, where he was working as a showrunner on It Takes a Thief. In his initial story outline for Spock's Brain from March 11, 1968, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy are exploring a small asteroid when Spock is separated from the others. After a brief search, Spock is found close to death, his brain having been removed. Kirk and McCoy beam Spock's body back to the Enterprise, where it is put on full life support. Kirk begins his search for the thieves. A particle trail from a spaceship leads the Enterprise to a world populated by a race of civilized but passive little men calling themselves the Nephilese. There are also little women there too, but they are all in hiding. With traces of Kuhn's writing on Errand of Mercy, the Enterprise men are greeted by council members, described as a diminutive group of smiling, charming people who evidently couldn't hurt a fly. Kuhn even writes that violence appalls them, just as he wrote about the Organians in Errand of Mercy. So he's kind of riffing on that episode too. The leader of the Nephiles is Air Vaughn. He informs Kirk that they have the capability of space travel, but have no desire to visit other worlds, nor do they want visitors on their world. He asks Kirk and his people to leave. Kirk refuses to go until he is certain the Nephiles have not taken Spock's brain. Scott informs Kirk that the planet would be unable to support life if not for a complex life support system. Spock tells Kirk when Kirk tries to contact the Enterprise, he picks up Spock's voice on his communicator. Spock tells Kirk he is in a dark void operating some vast mechanism. Scotty is able to determine the voice transmission is originating from below, where he also detects the sound of machinery. So Kirk confronts Irvon, who admits that his people have indeed taken Spock's brain. It is needed to run their life support complex. The previous operator, the greatest brain of their race, had controlled the system for 100 years before recently becoming injured. With this news, and after a few other plot turns, a confrontation takes place where Kirk and his men are knocked out when fired upon by a party of small armed men. Next, we meet the beautiful little women as Kirk, McCoy, and Scott are cared for. Scott still has a communicator and is able to again make contact with Spock. Kirk tells Spock to take control of the life support system. He then threatens telling him that Spock's brain will shut down the life support if they don't cooperate. Spock, while waiting for Kirk to come to him, devises a way to create a computer that will run the system in his place. But the problem still remains. How does Spock's brain get returned into Spock's head? Kirk orders a reluctant McCoy to perform the surgery. McCoy is assisted by the Nephiles doctors who removed the brain in the first place, but now lack the confidence to restore it. McCoy is more or less on his own. After he seals up his patient's skull, Spock tries to sit up and his face and falls down on the floor. When Spock tries to move his arms, his legs move instead. When he tries to sneeze, he laughs. Spock speculates that McCoy must have attached some of the nerve endings backwards, but he believes his superior Vulcan mental abilities will compensate and he will learn to adapt. Co-producer Robert Justman later said, "We tried to come up with some good ideas, some of which worked, some of which didn't." And I'm smiling because I'm remembering the late limited Spock's Brain, where Spock's brain is kidnapped by the bad guys, and we not only had to bring it back, but put it back into his head. It was quite a thing to read. Okay, now, then again, they kind of get into the section where there's lots of memos back and forth between Fred Freiberger and Roddenberry and Justman and other parties all weighing in on the script and wanting changes. I'm not going to go through all of them. Okay, so now, of course, eventually this episode did have to go to, or the script did have to go to DeForest Research so they could go through it, and catch any scientific or continuity, snafus. And of course, in this episode, there were a lot. Um, and DeForest's justifiably caustic assistant, Joan Pierce, immediately took note of Gene Coon's comedy at the end of the episode, where Spock stands from the operating table and falls on his face. She told Freiberger, quote, that McCoy would permit Spock to stand after just completing this radical surgery is unbelievable. Although precedents on show indicate vast improvements in medical techniques, bones must still knit and wounds still heal. We have seen McCoy keep Kirk in bed for 3 days for a stab wound. McCoy has just had the top of his head put back on. Pierce also had ideas to contribute to the script, writing, quote, one way around the serious medical problems involved in this script, if McCoy were to make use of an old one's neurosurgical device, which allowed for the reintegration of the nerve fibers, the suturing and matching, etc., then those problems could be avoided. The brain stimulator can impart to McCoy the knowledge of how to use the oscillating uh, nerve Feinberger, named after the prop man Irving Feinberger, to best advantage. It might even be used to knit the skull closed. So I guess basically it was her idea for the whole helmet, teaching helmet that would give knowledge. Okay, so the story was approved after several changes, and Kuhn immediately turned his focus to the script, which turned his attention rather back to doing Spectre of the Gun. He eventually sent in a revised storyline on April 19th, and then 2 weeks later, on April 30th, he finished his first draft teleplay. A week and a half after that, on May 8th and 9th, he turned in his second draft scripts for both The Last Gunfight and Spock's Brain. Kuhn was in a huge hurry to honor his agreement with Universal and get back to running It Takes a Thief, working on that series scripts as they came in. But Fred Freiberger and Arthur Singer being the story editor, were already discovering that Star Trek scripts were more demanding than those of other series that they had been associated with. There were seemingly endless out of this world concepts to be envisioned, endless rules to adhere to, and endless notes to address, all flooding in from highly critical colleagues like Roddenberry, Justman, Stan Robertson at NBC, Nimoy, Shatner, and Joan Pierce. Each script represented a mountain of work, and with each mountain that Freiberger and Singer had to scale, another mountain just as high stood behind it. Now, the great debate over what went wrong with Spock's Brain is always centered on the episode's lack of out and out comedy execution. Did Gene Kuhn, responsible for some of Star Trek's funnier moments, mean this wild concept to be a joke? Or if not, at least kind of some sort of satire? The fact is, Kuhn knew Roddenberry wanted to return Star Trek to its roots, so he wrote the story outlines for Spock's Brain with morbid seriousness. Organ transplanting was no laughing matter back in 1968. It was a hot button issue with many casualties in its wake. Yeah, at this time, most people who got organ transplants, they didn't live very long, whether it was heart or kidney or whatever. Now, James Doohan was not privy to the records regarding the development of the story and script that told who contributed what and who requested which changes. So he blamed most of the problems in the script on Freiberger. He said, quote, Fred Freiberger had no idea what he was doing. He was just a line producer, suddenly handed creative control over a show that was like nothing else on television. He was simply out of his depth, and boy, that was loudly announced to the fans with this episode. Freiberger was also on unfamiliar ground. On June 13th, on Arthur Singer's final draft, DeForest Research sent in the last of their coverage notes for this episode. Joan Pierce, after referencing a line from the latest version of the script that read, Kirk is suddenly in complete agony from the collar around his neck, commented, We used this gimmick before last year in Gamesters of Triskelion. Freiberger and Singer had never seen Gamesters of Triskelion, so they were unaware of this. They watched the episode and then promptly changed the pain inducing collars to the pain inducing belts. Pierce also made note of a problem, a big one that was ushered into the story with Robert Justman's seemingly good idea about having the slender, attractive women live below ground with the savage, burly men above. She wrote, quote, How this sexually divided society has maintained their race for 1,000,000 years begs explanation, especially in light of Spock's crack about Vulcans propagating by males. Suggests the final story indicate that male infants are abandoned on the surface. Pete Sloman of DeForest Research later said that Spock's brain could have been handled better, but it was not totally outside the realm of possibility. This is something that happens a lot in science fiction television, where the concept of how do we do something outrageous outweighs how do we tell a believable story. And it's a difficult thing to do. Science should not drive the drama, but the science needs to be honored to the best of our ability with what we know. It was a very tight and very narrow sort of walkway that Roddenberry and all involved in Star Trek were on. The scientific accuracy of these episodes could have been a lot better, but it could have been so much worse as well. Okay, Mark Daniels, who is Star Trek's most trusted and frequently hired director, was back for this first assignment of the third season. This was Daniels' 14th episode of Star Trek, and it would be his last. He was busy on other shows and had become quite in demand. On this TV season alone, which this would be what, 68 to 69 season, he directed 9 episodes of Hogan's Heroes, 6 episodes of a new series called The Outsider, 1 episode of a short lived sitcom called The Queen and I, and one for Gene Coon over on It Takes a Thief. And my guess would be, is that with him being more in demand, my guess is that probably his asking price went up. And, with their reduced budgets, I'm guessing they maybe just couldn't afford him anymore, to be honest. Let me take a drink of water again here. Just give me a moment. Okay. Now, Marge Doucet, let me, actually, I should have backtracked. There she is. She was 32, and she plays Kara, the brain thief. She was fairly new on TV. She was only in her second year, excuse me, but rapidly gaining employment. She had already appeared in episodes of The Wild Wild West, Get Smart, Hogan's Heroes, and Bonanza. Doucet would find fame eventually in soap operas as a regular on Santa Barbara for 3 years, All My Children for 3 years, and on The Guiding Light for 6 years, from the mid 80s all the way up to 2009. James Darris, who played the captured caveman, let me see if I can find him here. There he is. He plays a caveman who speaks English conveniently. He had just played. He had just appeared in an episode of I Spy, and had also appeared on Bonanza. And he would soon appear in an episode of Land of the Giants, playing a robot, and would also appear on an episode of Mannix. Sheila Leighton, I guess it's Leighton, maybe, played Luma. That's Luma there. See if I can get a better. Yeah, that's a little better, I guess. She was popping up in small roles all over television at this time, including guest spots on The Man from U.N.C.L.E., The Green Hornet, Get Smart, Hogan's Heroes, and Mannix. And then in this episode, there are several of the, the bridge regulars who frequently appear, as background characters. Let's see if I can find a good picture. Yeah, I mean, you can't see them all there. But these included Bill Blackburn playing Lieutenant Hadley, Frank Da Vinci playing Lieutenant Brent, Jenny Malone playing a yeoman, Roger Holloway playing Lieutenant Limley, and Eddie Paskey playing Lieutenant Leslie. And then there's Pete Kellett. Now, he played the guard that he plays the guard that Kirk fought. And he was a stuntman, and so he appeared a lot in several episodes as a stuntman. He was one of Kirk's henchmen in Mirror Mirror, the evil Kirk, that is, and also appears in Day of the Dove as a Klingon. He did a lot of stunt work in hundreds of TV shows, including 47 episodes of Gunsmoke. Okay, now, so Spock talks about, playing the brain dead sort of automaton version of Spock. Let me see. There he is. And so he says, so once the brain's gone, Spock becomes kind of a robot. And I had to figure out how to cool down even from cool and just go kind of limp, numb, dead and play brainless for a week. That kind of thing didn't really advance the character or Star Trek. On the other hand, we didn't have Spock doing anything that was out of character in that show necessarily, so in respect, the character was more or less protected. Okay. Okay. Now, as filming progressed on this episode, Roddenberry sent a memo to Freiberger suggesting that a scene be added that would be filmed later in the transporter room, giving the episode a new ending. He wanted to close the episode with Uhura presenting Spock a Vulcan medallion called the Edic, or IDIC, Infinite Diversity and Infinite Combinations. The intention was to serve as Roddenberry's new Star Trek mail order business, which would sell a piece of jewelry fashioned after the Edic medallion. Freiberger convinced his executive producer that it was too late to insert a new scene into the shooting schedule, especially one requiring a company to move to a completely different set and lighting setup. Roddenberry relented and picked up the script for the next episode to be produced with one agenda in mind: to find a place to put his edict pen into it to give it a plug. Okay, and then again, so we have the shots on the bridge from the back of the bridge where they're looking at the screen, which again are very unusual. But Daniels had actually done this before. He actually did something similar in the Doomsday Machine, where Kirk walks past the main view screen. But as presented here, along with other highly visual moments in the episode, it actually makes the Spock's Brain among the best looking episodes of the series. Nimoy said, quote, I was pretty much in more ways than one out of it during the making of this episode. I realized with what was going on around me that some of the stuff seemed kind of silly, but there isn't much of a contribution I could make because I wasn't a participant. Not much I could do about what was going on, and what we ended up with was an episode that was kind of a no brainer. Not our best. Okay, now despite the new sets and increased number of extras, stunt people, and props, the production finished $3,676 under budget, lowering the season's deficit to $16,796. Fred Freiberger had discovered what Robert Justman already knew about Mark Daniels. He was an invaluable asset, but Daniels did not take to Fred Freiberger or the new regime at Paramount Television, and after this episode of Star Trek, he had no desire to come back. He later said, or sorry, um, even with his experience as a sitcom director, Daniels was in no laughing mood. He later said, quote, Fred Freiberger, the new writer-producer, uh, and I didn't agree on what the director's role was. There are many writer producers who don't consider the director a partner. They consider him, shall we say, an employee. This is particularly true in episodic TV. They just want you to do the work, get the shots, and forget the rest. I didn't care for that kind of thinking. Daniels moved on, and for the 1970 TV season, he would direct episodes of The Flying Nun, The Name of the Game, The Survivors, Paris 7000, Net Playhouse, and a movie called Squeeze a Flower. And aside from The Flying Nun, I've never heard of any of those shows. In his future, he would direct assignments including a sci-fi pilot for Gene Roddenberry called Planet Earth, as well as a TV reunion movie of the TV show Father Knows Best, as well as directing multiple episodes of Kung Fu, The Doris Day Show, and 32 episodes of Marcus Welby, and 86 episodes of the sitcom Alice. So he directed a lot of Alice episodes. I'm wondering, because I mean, a TV season back then was what, like 24 seasons, 25 or 24 episodes. How many seasons did Alice run? Let me look at that. Let's see. Um, okay, here it is. It ran from 1976 to 1985. So nine years. I didn't realize it ran that long. Okay, so maybe not. I was thinking it was more like 6 or 7 years. So I was thinking he must have directed the vast majority of them, but maybe not at that many seasons. Okay, now here's the thing. We all look back, or at least most of us look back on this episode now as kind of a joke and kind of dismiss it and laugh at it. But here's the thing: Spock's brain won its time slot. It actually was the first time that Star Trek had won its time slot. I forget which one. There was one episode in season 2, I think, that won its time slot, and I forget which one it was. But that was the only time, and so it was the first time in probably close to a year that Star Trek actually won its time slot. Believe it or not. So it had a 36% audience share, which put it just narrowly ahead of the CBS Friday Night Movie, which had a 29% share. And that Friday Night Movie was actually the TV pilot for Hawaii Five-0. Okay, let me see here. So, what were the writers, producers, actors, and director of Spock's Brain thinking when they made it in 1968? Leonard Nimoy attempted to answer that question shortly after the episode first aired on NBC for the October 29, 1968 issue of Daily Variety. Nimoy wrote an article about the limitations of television production. He said in part, quote, "The fact is, a great deal of talent is required to work successfully in television, perhaps even more than in features. The finished TV product is nothing more than a series of educated artistic guesses determined solely by the previous experience of the individuals involved. Time to cogitate, to digest, or to live with an idea before committing it to film is strictly forbidden. The very basic form of creativity is undermined. TV artists and craftsmen should be congratulated for whatever successes they achieve, including simply turning out the product. They should not be held responsible or chastised for cinematic or artistic failures executed under prevailing conditions. Content is subject to the pressing realities of time." With Spock's Brain, the assembly line of 1960s television production had churned out another episode. But this one would be analyzed for decades to come and watched repeatedly and would become infamous around the world. Yeah, so overall, I think it's safe to say time has not been kind to Spock's Brain. The writer critics of Entertainment Weekly for a special Star Trek issue in 1995 picked this as the all-time worst episode, writing, quote, "The Vulcan's tremendous organ is stolen by a bunch of mini-skirted cuties. Apparently the episode writers also had their brains stolen." Okay, and then there's several critics here who kind of trash the episode. I won't go into it in too much detail. But one of them I did want to mention is Vic Mignogna, the star and executive producer for the web series Star Trek Continues, who said, quote, "People always say Spock's Brain was the worst. They tease about that a lot. It's certainly not the best episode, but what stayed with me about Spock's Brain is that there is this planet of people that needed something to control and manage their planet. And they had this knowledge that came to them through the controller and allowed them the technology to steal the brain of a person to help them continue to function. I thought that was a cool concept. Now, sure, we all know that you can't remove the brain and put it back in like that. It was a crazy idea, but I didn't personally find that episode as objectionable as a lot of people did." James Doohan said, "That was a chancy one. We can look at it now and I think it is silly, but it didn't seem that bad then. I didn't think it was great. I could tell there had been a drop in the writing since the previous year in the first few shows of the third season. But I saw the potential of something there. You see, we now look at it and say, how did they take that brain out and put it back in without messing up his hair? But you can make an argument that McCoy is not cutting into Spock's skull. He's manipulating things using medical technology that we cannot comprehend. Regardless, the execution suffers, and that was typical of the third year. We didn't have Gene Roddenberry and Gene Kuhn and Dorothy Fontana staying with those scripts and making sure that they made sense, or making sure that everything the characters said or did was in character. Star Trek required great writing and extra care. Most television is not that challenging, but Star Trek was. Fred Freiberger's confidant, Peter Greenwood, said, quote, that episode was an internal source of torment for Fred. He said to me more than once, Peter, people blame me for that show, but I had nothing to do with it. I would have never put that show into production. That is completely against the grain. I think it's a stupid ass show. He was just incensed that people couldn't understand that he had nothing to do with that episode. And if he had his way, it would never have been produced. Well, I don't know about nothing to do with it. I think that might be an exaggeration, but yeah, he probably gets too much of the blame. Mark Daniels said, quote, the problem with the third year is that Gene didn't give the series his full attention. He was doing other things, and we needed his guidance badly. And Robert Justman said, quote, I'll tell you the truth. I don't have any favorites. I love them all, even Spock's brain, which is possibly the worst one we ever made. Okay. And that will do it for Spock's brain. And Stony Brown says, brain and brain. What is brain? Indeed. What is brain? Okay. So that will do it for this episode. Now, I should be back next week, and I'll be covering the episode. I believe it's Is There in Truth No Beauty? Let me double check here. Yeah, Is There in Truth No Beauty? That will be the next episode, which I'll take a look at. I should look at next week. And of course, I will be on Earth's Mightiest Mondays on Monday night with my friends J-Man and Sean and Steven, as I have been for a while now. Now, some of you may be aware that Axanar, so we're finally getting Axanar. Axanar is going to have its premiere on the 26th, which I believe is, Sunday, this coming Sunday. Now I'm going to give people a little time to see it, so I'm not going to look at it, next Tuesday, but probably the week after that, like what is that, August 4th, I think. So August 4th, I'll probably, instead of looking at an episode of the original series, I'll be covering that film and talking about it. I'll try and see, maybe I can put a panel together and we can discuss it. And let's see. And Sony Brown says, Dr. Pulaski episode. What you mean, like this episode? Yeah, it does seem kind of like something. She had a couple of episodes where she did some odd things. Yeah, it does kind of feel like something she would have been in. And thank you for being here, by the way, Stony Brown TV. Thank you for showing up. Appreciate it. And Rogue says, thanks for the heads up. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, it's premiering here on YouTube, and it's also going to premiere at the San Diego Comic-Con, I believe, like simultaneously. I'm not sure. And my understanding is there's actually going to be another one later in the year. So it's kind of like a trilogy. You've got the original one, Prelude to Axanar, and then there's this one, which is called, was it like The Gathering Storm or something like that? And then there's going to be another Axanar film later in the year. That's and I forget the name of that one. So that's cool. But yeah, that will do it. Please do like the stream if you haven't already, and please do sub to the channel and hit the like if you have not done that already. And I hope you all have a good night, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.